When we are talking about leadership, especially spiritual leadership, we can't talk about it without God's presence. God chooses and prepares among people who will become a leader. Thank God for more than 33 years of my ministry. I learned a lot of things, including leadership, and I found that we can learn from the Bible, the Word of God, the foundation of how to be a leader. Today, we learn from Joseph's life, the son of Jacob, who became a leader in Egypt. Genesis 37 to 50 describe Joseph's life history before, during, and after he became a leader. We will find a long process preparing by God. We will learn 6 principles to be a spiritual leader. The first of all, the will of God. It said that Joseph dreamed a dream 2 times with the same meaning, where his parents and his brothers come to bow down to him. Those dreams come from God to tell him about Joseph's futures. Of course, not every dream comes from God, but this one was the will of God for Joseph. That is why his father observed it, because he thought something special from those dreams. The will of God is one of the basic things we have to know. In what capacity we will be a leader, when, where, and why. From that time, Joseph started his journey to God's will. The leader needs to know God's will for him or her. The second, learn to live relying on God. When he was young, Joseph became a special because his father loved him more than all his children. Genesis 37, verse 3. He lived in a comfortable zone. He became a person dependent on his father. But God has a plan for him. He separated Joseph from his father through a very special way. His brothers sold him as a slave without the knowledge of his father. Of course, that was a terrible experience and very difficult to understand as a believer. But Psalm 105, verse 16 to 18 describe that this event was the sending of God. At that time, Joseph could not depend on his father anymore. He was in a situation where no one could be relied on anymore except God. He started to learn how to rely his future on God. The real leader has started to live relying on God. The third, God equipped a leader. As a young person, Joseph lacked knowledge and experiences. he needs to learn a lot of things before leading. There is no school for him to study. God uses his experience, his life as a class to equip him. When Joseph was a slave at Potiphar's house, God blessed him and made him successful. That was the reason why Potiphar made him overseer over his house. And all that he had, he put into Joseph's hand. Joseph has chance to learn how to manage all things by experience. Did you realize that this is the lessons of management? A leader needs skill to manage all things. But after being slandered by Potiphar's wife, Joseph is sent to prison. Again, this unbelievable experience is difficult to explain without God's presence. Why didn't God defend him? The answer is God was equipping him to be a leader. When Joseph was in prison, God never left him alone. God showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prisons, and whatsoever they did, he was the door of it. Genesis 37, verse 22. Don't you see? Joseph led people in the prison. He did not only learn about management, but also leadership, and led the people. God equipped him to be a leader by learning management and leadership through his difficult lives. The fourth thing, being a trusted leader. One of the important things to be a leader is being trusted. To become a trusted person requires a process of time, and evidence is needed. Joseph was trusted by Potiphar because he saw what Joseph had done during his stay as a slave. And Joseph was trusted by the keeper of the prison because he heard and saw what Joseph had done before. Being trusted and keeping trusting is a must for a leader. Untrusted person cannot become a leader. The fifth thing, keep trusting in God. If we are in Joseph's positions, one of the prayer requests is asking God to release him from prisons. We think that Joseph did not do anything wrong. God knows that. But why did God let him stay in prison for at least 2 years? When the chief of butlers and the chief of bakers were put in the same prisons as Joseph, I believe he thought that was a chance to be released from the prison. After he interpreted the dreams, Joseph asked the chief of bakers to pass his message to the Pharaoh that he was innocent. And from that time, Joseph started to rely his hope on these persons. Joseph was disappointed because this person forgot him for 2 years. That moment made Joseph beg to entrust his life to God. A leader needs to keep trusting in God, not in man. 2 years later, God fulfilled his plan through Pharaoh's dream, and Joseph became a leader in Egypt. The last thing, but not least, keep living in obedience. Joseph became a leader under Pharaoh when he was 30 years old. God equipped him for 13 years to be a leader. But during his time as a leader in Egypt, Joseph never contacted his family. Not because he couldn't, but he was trying to forget the bitter past with his brothers. He started to enjoy his leadership in a comfortable zone. He tried to avoid meeting his brothers, but God sent them instead. Why? God did not want Joseph to be a hypocritical leader, but to live in obedience. God wanted Joseph to show God's grace by forgiving his brother and declare God's good news rather than revenge. And through that difficult encounter, Joseph finally forgave and accepted them. Joseph learned not to replace God's position as a judge. Joseph learned to see God's plan behind a bitter experience. And Joseph learned to defeat evil by declaring God's good news to those who do evil. This is a life of obedience that a leader needs. To be a leader is not based on our ambition, but God's will. And we must be willing to be prepared according to God's purpose. God bless you.